All right, welcome to episode 108 of the Sumer Sports Show. I'm Eric Eager. I'm joined on every Monday by Thomas Dimitroff, the CEO of Sumer Sports. Thomas, a fun weekend of football, man. We found out some things about some teams. We pumped the brakes on some other teams, and overall, I think there was a lot to be gleaned from these games this weekend.
Love it. I mean, we're starting to turn in, 4 games in. We're starting to see some consistency or lack of consistency that we're going to talk about. I mean, there are a number of people who are already on the hot seat, so to speak, and I hate digging into that as the media might, but it's the reality. I'd like to share some of that along the way, how these teams are feeling, at least what my projections are for some of these general managers and head coaches as they're working their way through with the teams that they have right now. It's not an easy time, believe me.
Absolutely not. And, we're going to go through, as we do kind of every Monday, with, 3 or 4 to 5 games, just to kind of go through, what our thoughts were. We're actually going to start where the league ended yesterday, which is with the New York Jets losing to the Kansas City Chiefs, the defending Super Bowl champion, Kansas City Chiefs. Let's pull up the Sumer Sports Twitter page, @Sumer Sports. By the way, if you are not a follower of Sumer Sports on Twitter, you could be one of the next 300 to get us to 10,000 on Sumer Sports as a Twitter page. So go ahead and follow us if you're already not. This is interesting, Thomas, because I do think that there are there's one thing that skews these numbers here, which are clearly a good but not great game by Kansas City, and a Jets game that is better than what they've played in the last 3 games without Aaron Rodgers, but still not a great game. Zach Wilson still negative EPA, while Patrick Mahomes is positive. I will say, though, Patrick Mahomes turning the bobbled snap into a first down is skewing the numbers a little bit. Zach Wilson turning the bobbled snap into a turnover are skewing the numbers a little bit, because we know that turnovers are worth a couple points to the defense. But give me your first impression of this game and, sort of where we go from here.
Who do you want me to start with? Which side?
Let's just start, because I think the Chiefs are maybe less. I think the Chiefs are less interesting because we've seen this song and dance from Kansas City before. Like, they're 5 games under 500 if you look at them against the spread for the last, since they've won the Super Bowl in 2019, Thomas. Meaning, like, they're a team that oftentimes will win but doesn't cover the spread, meaning that they win but don't blow out teams. Last night was a classic example where all the bettors, including my friend Steve Kornacki from NBC, saying that was a very important slide by Patrick Mahomes for many. I think a lot of people are fixating on the fact that the Chiefs struggled through this game, but they struggled through a lot of games.
Look, let me start by saying, first of all, Kansas City, obviously extremely talented. Brett Veach, the way he's putting together the team, with Andy Reid coaching the hell out of a team, and as he's done in the past, great, love it. That said, probably because I come from the Patriot paradigm, it's always on my mind about distractions. I have to tell you, taken aback by something I believe there are distractions there. Never easy to repeat, never easy to ride that line with. I mean, every time we go to the commercials, it's one of the Chiefs and Taylor Swift now, and in Coach Reid, and I love Coach Reid, painting mustaches, eating French fries and chicken bits, and then it goes over to Kelsey, and then we're missing balls, and then we're throwing interceptions. I can't help to think, like, okay, how are they feeling about that? Do they go back, like anyone who's very competitive? Does Coach Reid go home at night after a game like that? Does Patrick Mahomes and does Kelsey, and do they think about where their focus has been? Not saying they're not going to win. They won. Just like Patrick Mahomes said, you have to win ugly sometimes. Completely agree. But going against the Jets this game, I mean, Jeff Albrecht, man, he is rocking that defense. I love the way they're playing. flying around, throwing themselves around, making plays, stunning people. I think it's really, really good. I mean, that was very close, which brings me to the finale. I mean, we see what a quarterback can do. I got a little irritated with Chris Collinsworth the more he was raving about Zach, right? We won't get into that, but I was thinking, God, just hold off on that a little bit. We're not sure. This is the first game he's really turned the corner on this. And then he has a big, big time mistake. Unfortunate for the Jets. And he's coming along, no question about it. But look, you have to judge quarterbacks by what they do when it comes down to nut cutting time.
Yeah, for sure. I think that the hard part about the Zach Wilson thing is, we've seen it all. I texted you a very funny joke last night, I thought, about how Chris was talking about Zach. And it was one of those where it's like, it's like your kid that's taken the car out and wrapped it around a pole. And then, he or she is, still living. Yeah. Like, where like you put kid gloves on when you're trying to evaluate the player, but that's not necessarily helpful for a Jets team, Thomas, and we'll transition to them in a second here. It's not helpful for a Jets team that's trying to actually win something this year, that has, so much levered up for this current team, for them to now say, well, the standard is different for Zach Wilson. I do think Zach Wilson made some throws that you would have bought into back when he was at BYU and stuff like that. But the consistency has to be there, because we saw what the Jets defense is capable of against a pretty good offense. Now, there was a good Sean had this comment, said this Chiefs receivers lack downfield separation is concerning. Offense feels congested. I do agree. I do think that the defense, I do think that the defense is, they struggled for a couple weeks. They come around here. Defense is pretty random. To Difficult's point here, what the heck was happening with the secondary if Zach Wilson missed 5 open throws, but still had good numbers overall? I don't think the Chiefs in the secondary played particularly well. And it's funny because last week you had all this discussion about the corner from Washington, Trent McDuffie, about how he was graded a certain way and all this kind of stuff. It's like, well, corner play is remarkably streaky. So like what goes up must come down. I do think that the Chiefs played a poor game both offensively and defensively last night, and it let Zach Wilson do some things. When you look at last night's game, we've seen this from young, struggling quarterbacks a lot. Do you think that there are things that they can do to help build on this, or is it going to be one of those things where it's just delaying the inevitable for that position for the Jets, relative to getting somebody in there who's going to be a little bit more competent at the position?
Look, I want to say this, and I actually said this on a show, I don't know, way back at the beginning of the season when Aaron went down. They had to go into this season with Zach as their guy, right? There's no other way. I know people are throwing darts at the staff and the decision of where Robert is, and his making comments about people, have to go with Zach and he's our guy. I believe you have to do that until you're proven otherwise. And when is that, right? I was going back and forth a little bit with Mike Lombardi talking about it. Mike's pretty strong about, look, it's time to move on. As a guy's having sat in that spot, and the fact that we drafted this guy high, right? I'm talking about Joe Douglas. I mean, it is a in your stomach bad feeling, right? You're trying to go yes, no. I personally would give it, I'd probably give it 6 games to see where you are and then make that decision. Because at that point, as Mike Lombardi said to me, there's no way you can look back. Once you make that move, and this has been discussed before, you can't bring that quarterback back. All of a sudden you bring someone else in and he gets hurt, and then you bring Zach back into the fold. That's really, really messy. You got to give it the college try, see where he is, and then make the decision.
Yeah, it's so much different, though. It's so much different than so we talked about this on the show. Zach Wilson is the first quarterback picked in the top, I can't remember, top 10, who was a backup on the team that drafted him in year 3 since I think it was Matt Leinart in 2009 or 8 for the Cardinals, the year they win the Super Bowl with Kurt Warner. It's just not it's just not a league. And this is different from, like growing up in Minnesota, Jerry Burns would bench Wade Wilson and Tommy Kramer they would go back and forth with those guys all the time. Like nowadays, to your point, it's like once you move on from a quarterback, it's really hard to sort of put the toothpaste back in the tube, so to speak. And I think that was the one part of this whole process that maybe they didn't think through. They probably in hindsight would have rather to have a backup quarterback with kind of a win 500, go 500 in your games type of feel to him and catch some luck with a great defense. And it just didn't work out because I think part of it is, and you could speak to this more than I can as somebody who's built teams, but like Joe Douglas wants Zach Wilson to work, right? Of course he does. He drafted him. So I think that there's a little bit of like, they cut bait on Zach Wilson, but they really didn't. And so when variance hits, they're stuck kind of with that decision again. And it's almost like Joe Douglas, and like, I'm not speaking ill of Joe Douglas. Everybody in that 2021 draft, with the exception of Trevor Lawrence, has so far flopped. So it's hard to pick quarterbacks, but he almost sort of has to relive the bust twice of Zach Wilson, which I don't know if that's a fun experience.
So make no mistake about it, and you know this. You're a head coach and you're a general manager. The decision you make on your quarterback, I've preached about this from the beginning of us doing these pods, right? You're judged by your moves. You're judged not only by the quarterback you pick, the quarterback you place in the first at your starting role, the quarterback you carry through your starting role, your backup quarterback and how he interacts, everything around the quarterback, everyone, not just your fan base and the media, Eric, but your players in that locker room. It's unbelievable what you do with your quarterback and how they begin to judge the head coach and the GM. And when the eye rolling starts coming, and when the complaints start coming and the arguments on the sideline starts coming, which we'll get into a little bit in Atlanta, right? When you saw a little bit of that, that's a really, really hot spot for a GM. Then you start having that conversation with your head coach each evening, right? And you have these conversations every night, at least Dan Quinn and I did, Mike Smith and I as well. But you come in, you start spending time together, and you have deep conversations, not only about what's best for the team, but how the team is responding. I get certain things as a general manager from around the building, from the athletic performance people, et cetera, et cetera. The head coach does from the coaching staff and in the meeting rooms. And you bring all that together as team builders, and you really hone in on what needs to be done.
Yeah, for sure. And it's hard because this was not the intended one. But we get this at, like, think about this. Like, you've been in businesses before where it's like the performance of management at sort of every level has an impact on management at the other levels, right? And make no mistake, quarterback is management. Like, quarterback is at worst a mid-level manager for an NFL team, and at best, right, in a case where a guy's like Tom Brady or Patrick Mahomes, that guy's probably not as powerful as head coach, GM, but in that kind of, like, he's not a middle manager, he's somewhere else. And so if that quarterback is struggling, it has people like the owner starts talking. He doesn't go to Zach Wilson's locker and he doesn't say, hey, Zach, you should have, to difficult point, missed 5 throws. He goes to your office and says, hey, Thomas, what the bleep is going on with this guy? And we see that with all businesses. And so, in a lot of businesses, it's as easy, and it's not easy either, but of like changing it. But at quarterback, it's not, because you have the salary cap and you have, obviously you only have access to certain talent. So that's rough. I do want to transition to your old team. You go ahead, Thomas.
Just think about this. So yes, an owner can come in and he's going to be talking to you as a GM and as a head coach about the moves you've made, the players you made, sometimes even going back to, hey, that conversation we had at the combine at Ruth's Chris or at what's the place we go to, whatever it's called, whatever the steakhouse is. St. Elmo's, gosh, sorry. And remember that conversation we had, Thomas. Remember what you said about this guy. We're going with this guy. This guy can take us to the next level. Owners have very, very long memories on that kind of stuff. That's why they're paying. Remember, GMs are no longer making $1 million a year, and that was big. GMs are making $3.5, $4 to $5 to $6 million. Head coaches that we know are making 8, 9, 10 beyond. That owner is looking at you saying, hey, man, step the F up. What is the deal here? and they should be in today's world.
Yeah, for sure. And that's, you make a fantastic point. As much as owners have gotten to where they are by being really good with the details, most people don't just own an NFL team, right? When you were at the Falcons, Arthur had the soccer team, he had he had all this other stuff. Those guys, like, they only remember the crucial inflection points of all these things, because you would go insane if you try to remember who Thomas signed at left guard, right? So they only remember the big decisions. And if you grab his arm at the combine and you say, I trust me, well, he's going to remember that, especially if it blows up. So this is this is a really tough one for the Jets, but I gotta believe it's a little easier, Thomas, than what's going on in Atlanta, because Zach Wilson happened because of an injury, not by choice. But when you look at what's happened in Atlanta, Thomas, it's because the Atlanta Falcons decided, through, I think, probably a lot of deliberation and all those things, but they decided specifically that they were going to start former Cincinnati Bearcat Desmond Ridder at quarterback. And over the last 2 weeks, Thomas, the Atlanta Falcons have scored 13 points here against a Jacksonville defense that gave up, a lot to Houston the previous week at home. They go to London. They scored just 7. Desmond Ridder, who had been playing in the 1 o'clock hour for the last 3 games, has to play in front of the national stage, and it doesn't go particularly well. When you look at, minus 0.53 EPA per dropback, that's third percentile, meaning only 2% of NFL teams have performed worse than that on average. They actually ran the ball pretty well in the 78th percentile. You see Bijan Robinson, I think, doing quite a bit there. It's not particularly great for Atlanta. Now, I will say they have the easiest schedule left in the season per our metrics, so it could get better. But if you're sitting there in Atlanta's shoes, a ton of talent, an easy schedule moving forward, but a quarterback that's holding you back, what are you thinking?
Okay, let me just start by saying, I think what they did in the offseason, they made some very solid moves. Let's just start with their defense first, because I'm going to move towards where Desmond Ridder is. But I think it's worthwhile hearing the positives. That defense, I love their grit. I love they come to play. Just watching Calais Campbell, who I would raise my hand saying, gosh, how much does he have left? He has presence. I love watching Bates play, right? He's flying around, right? So what I'm saying, amongst a number of other players, I'm a big A.J. Terrell guy. I saw Kuda out there working his butt off to try to make things right for an offense that they had not huge, let's put it in perspective. They had good expectations. And believe me, Arthur Blank saying, here we go. There's a lot of money we're putting in this team, right? What did they put? 70, 80 million. There was a lot of money put into this defense and offense through draft picks. Defense is playing their butts off. The defense is keeping it alive in a lot of ways. Offensively, they have a hell of a run game. They have, we've talked about that on and on. We don't need to go on ad nauseum about that. It was good to see them in the second half come back and keep running the rock, right? And they were gashing them at times, which I thought, there you go. That's the way to be. Drive it down their throat, go hard, go hard, go hard. But in the end, back to your point, they're still going to ride on a quarterback in this league. I don't think you're winning. I don't think you're winning the big games when you're there with a quarterback that is in that midline area right now. And some would argue, if you're looking at your stats, and I'll let you pull them up off of our Sumer website, something that would really indicate more. Desmond Ridder is an athlete, can move around, but he doesn't have the opportunity to move around in the pocket, right? These defensive coordinators are coming at him. They know the deal is rattle this dude, rattle him from the beginning to the end, let him throw interceptions, force him. He's got really good receivers around him. You saw that stat. 3 in the last first round picks they've had in the last 3 years. Pitts, London, and Bijan. That's an impressive 3. But if the quarterback can't get it to him beyond, some of the swing passes, we got to start getting him to get the ball down the field, right? Can he do that? And then you start seeing people rolling their eyes on the sideline, the argument starting, the frustration, because this organization, I believe, had this feeling that they were going to take it to another level, and it starts to get complicated now. What do? I read recently that, Arthur Smith, who my respect for him, I really, really like him. He's got a really tough decision to make. This is a little different here, as I understand. Arthur is going to be the one that's making that move. I'm not taking anything away from Terry Fontenot, but this is going to be on Arthur Smith to make this decision. Do you pull this guy and put Heineke in? Problem is, back to our owners remembering, and I'm rambling here, but sorry about this because it fires me up. An owner saying, back at the combine or all along here, you told me this is the dude that we're moving forward with. And I, as Arthur Blank, went online and made a categorical statement. This is a guy we're going with into the future. That's a strong statement.
Yeah, you can see here, I actually had to click on the button that says show more to get to Desmond Ridder because he was off the original list. He had been performed so poorly. If you look at expected points added, Thomas, which is just kind of a way of like making a little bit more smooth the idea of yards per play. You have Desmond Ridder, only Kenny Pickett, Joe Burrow, and Zach Wilson. By the way, Pickett injured now. Joe Burrow has been injured all year, and the Zach Wilson has had his struggles, have been lower than him. And this was an individual, by the way, where Desmond Ridder, who was backing up Marcus Mariota, who last year actually was in the top, half of the league in EPA per play, even though I think a lot of people were like, Marcus Mariota isn't that good. This offense ran much more efficiently last year with a veteran like Mariota. So even then, I think the gamble that Arthur Smith was making was you get a younger guy who maybe has more potential, you put him in for a guy like Mariota, and this offense can still run. And I think of all of Arthur Smith's moves to this point, in Tennessee, it was Mariota, Tannehill. Tannehill leads the league in yards per pass attempt, leads them to a 1 seed, all that kind of stuff. They're able to win with kind of a mid-tier quarterback. My issue, and it's funny because a really smart front office executive once told me about offensive line play, but I believe it about other positions. It's like, don't shoot for average because if you miss, it's going to be awful. Shoot for good, and if you miss, he'll be average. Except for like Russell Wilson, sometimes it goes poorly. But I think what the Falcons did here, which I don't think is necessarily illogical, is to say, the offensive line Thomas Dimitroff drafted is really good. The defense, we're going to add pieces because it hasn't been that good. They added pieces, to your point, with Campbell, Onyemata, Bud Dupree's been, a guy there. They have all kinds of players, Jesse Bates. And we have 3 top 10 skill positions, Pitts, London, and Bijan. All we need is an average quarterback. And I think the problem is if you miss on the eval, right? If you say he's average and he's actually not, then it's much, much worse, of course, because, you can see the whole thing turning, but that there's that one key cog that's keeping it all from being good.
So this is where you and I, and we have this discussion / never argue. We never argue, Eric. Even in here, we have a good time. I don't think it's semantics here. I don't think it's average. You need a quarterback that's going to be a 5.5. Again, understanding that a 5 is adequate, 6 is good. You need to be in there on your way to being a 6 and a 6.5 to not only survive in this league, but to win games and to be beyond 9 wins, right? It's a big thing. He is still very young, no question about it. You can just see it in his presence. And they really like him here. I've heard really positive things about his personality and his competitiveness. His coach there at Cincinnati, when he was there, he was saying they know each other, right? They know each other through Vrabel. And those guys were talking about how much of a competitor he was. Not saying he's not a competitor, but it's tough when you get rattled by a D-line in this league, which will continue to happen. You're not going to get away with just dumping it off, right? You see some of these teams now, they are busting their ass towards number 7. Once things go for about a half a second or 2.1 seconds, they know that the look is going out here to swing the ball out. Rightly so, I get it. And then, you start to think about that. What does it take? Where will Arthur Smith go with this quarterback back to the Jets? How far into the season will he go before they start knocking or considering where they're going with Heineke? And I'm not stirring the pot on all that at all. I would love them to have the confidence to continue to move and get him more development. The kid needs to continue to develop. I'm not in any way saying he's a bust. I'm just saying what we need to figure out, Eric, if he's average a 4 versus a 6, that's a big, big deal in this league.
Yeah, and that's obviously what we're trying to build here, and what we are building here in Sumer is the ability to make that, to understand that difference and how much that magnitude of 2 points in the scouting scale really means. And that's probably, to your point, like even though I build those models and help build those models, my intuition is more to think in different buckets, like average, below, and so even then it's probably not precise, because I agree with you. Like Marcus Mariota was good enough to execute that offense last year if the defense and the rest of the group was good enough, and the running backs, I actually think Algier is fine, but like I think that, and this is such an interesting take. Like I want to get your opinion on this, because a lot of mistakes that I think in the NFL are sometimes made by assuming that everything else is going to stay the same, and all you have to do is change one thing, but you do change the system. And I do wonder if they didn't look and say, maybe, I don't know. Like, I think maybe expectations for Ritter were just different than reality. And to your point, I wonder, they start this week, they have Houston at home this week, getting back, they are favored in that game just slightly. Actually, Houston has really emerged, as you know, Thomas. But do they squeak out a couple wins here? Because I think if they get to 8 or 9 wins, like I think everybody's going to be happy, even though, given where their schedule is at, I don't know if that's necessarily a success.
Look, man, think about this. They're going against a team that is hot right now, given what they're playing with. Just watched the presser with their head coach a few minutes ago before we got on. They have a quarterback there that people are buying into, the one that was kind of, eschewed, so to speak, by a lot of people, right? Oh, he had a grade of whatever it was, an S2 grade that was lower than warranted, et cetera, et cetera. Now, even though Desmond Ritter, of course, is not in his first year, he's going against a quarterback who's a first year. So in essence, they kind of are, right? They're two young guys. And, oh, by the way, there was an opportunity to take, opportunities to take, not saying there necessarily. There's all this discussion right now. I know we're going to talk a little bit about the Chicago game, but was there an opportunity to take a quarterback a year, 2 or 3 ago? Basically 3 years ago, right? And will they trade? Will they eventually? The discussion out there is, will they knock on the door in a trade like that? If Chicago's looking to make a move on that one day, I'm not saying they are. I'm just, when you read that, what does that make you feel as a true data person? As far as where do they go with it?
Really good question here by Bad_Gravity. Do we know why Kyle Pitts isn't more involved in the offense? This whole question that you just asked is what I'm wrecking my brain on, because you take Pitts at 4 over Fields, right? And Mac Jones, for what, and we know now what kind of players they are. I tend to believe that Mac Jones and Fields would be successful in this offense, given the infrastructure. And of course, you're responsible for some of that. I think my concern is you take Pitts at 4 over a lot of other players that in hindsight make sense. And yet at the same time, I mean, Jonnu Smith had more targets than Pitts on Sunday morning, Thomas. I think you have to open up the question about, do they go and look for Justin Fields? Do they go? They were not interested in Lamar Jackson, even though they were one of the few teams that could have afforded him this offseason. They were not, obviously interested in Fields at the time. Now he went 7 places below their pick, so maybe they were right, and so forth. I think Kirk Cousins is an option for them. I think Kirk Cousins gets them to, where they want to be at $10 million rest of year. You probably have to give the Vikings a 2nd-round pick for that, right? But I also wonder about Pitts. If you're not going to use Pitts, there's going to be some team that's going to want to trade for him, the same way that the Vikings traded for T.J. Hawkinson last year. So I have all kinds of questions. I don't understand what's happening.
So I have a couple other points here. So you're talking about Pitts 21 yards, right? That was his total yesterday. I think Drake London was 28 yards and a touchdown. You saw that nice adjusting catch. they kept honing in the networks on London and Pitts, right, on the sidelines. And you could see it in their faces, right? Where were they? Disappointed that they were losing? I don't want to suggest anything, but we know egos and we know competitors, right? We know that before you know it, Pitts is going to be up for free agency. Before you know it, London is daydreaming all along in his first year or two, like, I'm going to rock this world and this is going to parlay into something big. You can't hold that against them. That's what they think. Now their minds are like, wow, there was talk about this. You get a new running back in, a new shiny toy, a new shiny app, and all of a sudden these receivers / tight end are saying, wow, are there enough balls to get around everyone in this offense? And how do you do it to keep people happy? And how do you do it you also have some other guys, right? I mean, who was arguing?
Matt Collins was the one who, dude, he looked like he wanted to fight Desmond Ridder. And like, we've had that before. You played football in college, so did I. I remember scout team was like one of the quarterbacks, a complete meatball, threw a pass over the middle, got me hung out to dry, basically got me like broken for a week, comes over, he's like, hey, way to go get that one. And I probably looked at him the way that Matt Collins looked at Des Ridder. Like, these things act like it's the same thing with management, right? When management fails, right, the rank and file get ornery, right? And they start to voice them. And so like, and the other part, which is tough, and this is why I have a lot of respect for the courage that like guys like Wilson and Ridder and guys like that have just to play the position, is you have to fight like hell to get that respect back from your teammates. Because once it's gone, it's hard to get back. And that was like when I looked at that, I was like, shit, Ritter's got a lot of work to do, just even to get the locker room back in his graces.
Sure, of course he does. And you're spot on it. There's just, when you start looking at, there's a lot going on there. They're coming back a long flight, right? That's a tough flight to be coming back on. Don't they have 2 home games right now? So what I would say, I guess my last point on this is, yes, it's on the head coach and his coaching staff to keep these guys happy on the offensive side, right? Make sure you're stroking them in the right way. It's also on the general manager and Terry Fontenot to make sure that he is interacting in his own way with the players, but not as much as the coaches. What he needs to do, in my opinion, is he needs to be very smart about how he's interacting in today's world. Believe me, 30 years ago, GMs would tell the agent to go get screwed. In today's world, you have to be mindful of how you're interacting with the agent, because if these guys are being represented by big-time guys, and I won't mention names, they can stir it up even more. Before you know it, that locker room gets really anxious.
We'll talk about that on the Wednesday show, because there's a ton of really interesting league dynamics about agents and, GMs and owners and players and kind of how that thing happens. Hopefully you guys can tune in. A lot of people really like that Wednesday show when you and I just kind of riff about real NFL topics that real NFL people have to face. Speaking of reality, Thomas, it hit hard for the Miami Dolphins on Sunday in Orchard Park. This was, and I don't actually want to, like, I don't actually think the Miami Dolphins played that poorly. I think that Buffalo just played really well. Josh Allen, I texted you last night, I think he's the league MVP right now. You look, 25.9 expected points added, Thomas. That's a win is roughly 35 points. So Josh Allen almost adding a full win of value there by himself. Stephon Diggs with 3 touchdowns. That was a really nice. The Bills seem to have done a good job of figuring out complementary pieces aside from Diggs, which was kind of their Achilles heel last year. You saw contributions from Knox. You saw contributions from Kincaid and Gabe Davis and the running backs. Whereas Miami, they gave up a lot of pressure. They gave up some sacks and some interceptions. But for the most part, I just think that they were a little bit outclassed in this game, and there was some variance, right? Fumbles and that kind of thing. When you watched that game back, Thomas, what were your impressions?
All right, let me first start by saying I like how Mike McDaniels has come into this season in his own groove, right? Being his own person. That's who he is, right? He's got his own, he beats to his own drum. A lot of people were throwing darts at him early on, right? Now he's proven, and there's a lot of talk about him and the Dolphins, proven that they belong. That's great. I'm also a little bit over how sometimes we get carried away within a game or two, and everyone's throwing their hands up saying this guy's, not just him, the guy, the coach, or the team, it was like, let's put the brakes on a little bit here and let them be who they are. Just because they put 70 on the board or whatever it was the other day doesn't mean they're going to do that to everyone, right? Let's be honest. And the reality is, though Tua is really playing well, Tua is going to get rocked around by certain people. He's unfortunately 1 or 2 concussions away from making a decision. People are going to start rattling him as they can. That whole idea, when you listen to how it's set up in the system and what Mike McDaniels has done as far as getting that ball off right away, the lanes that they're creating in that offense, love that. Very, very smart. In a situation like this, though, with Buffalo defense playing the way they were, I thought they were playing their asses off. I loved their presence there, to your point. I put a question mark beside your text yesterday about Josh being the MVP of the league. I hadn't looked at it that way. I thought, man, this guy's competitive. I like what he does. I don't like some of the interceptions, etc. My take on the game in the end was Buffalo showed up. They weren't having any more of the kind of glitzy glam talk that everything that's coming out of Miami. And they were trying to say, look, this is a statement game for us. And again, they stepped up and showed them, who was who in the division right now.
Yeah, I don't downgrade Miami a ton after that game. Ultimately, I actually said this. I can't remember if I said it on air. I did. I said it on air Friday in the solo pod. When I made the point spread for this game, I wrote a note to myself. I said, you're too low on Miami. You're too high on Buffalo. And I don't even think I'm right, but I do think Miami is 9.5-point favorites next week against a Giants team we'll see tonight. I think that's fine. I actually think Miami's in a very good position to beat up on some of the teams that aren't in the upper tier. But when they face a team like Buffalo, and we talk about organizations a ton on this show, Brandon Beane, Sean McDermott, right? They've been good for a long time, and I'm going to be very, very slow to dismiss them as divisional champs, right? I'm going to have to see it before. Now, if they go up against Kansas City in the playoffs, all bets are off, right? But when I look at Buffalo in the regular season in this division, it's going to be really hard. And Thomas, yesterday they won. No Von Miller, that's their most expensive defensive player. Tremaine Edmonds is already gone. They're mixing and matching him at a linebacker. Jordan Poyer was out. Damar Hamlin got his first playing time since he had a heart attack on the field. This was not a full strength Buffalo team either. And they still, everybody's like, oh, what McDaniel's going to do against those safeties, blah, blah, blah. Ultimately, the stronger team won out. That doesn't mean Miami won't win the Super Bowl. It doesn't mean they won't beat Buffalo in the rematch. It just means that this Bills team, to me, is still deserving of our respect as one of the elite teams in the football.
Look, and I know it was said, and not to underplay this, and I know Sean McDermott said about the Buffalo Bills mafia. I mean, that fan base and where they came, I know we talk about it all the time, but when you're on the field or when you're a part of an organization and you feel the noise of your crowd making differences, it's so heartwarming. That's the only word I can say. It gives you chills, right? You're watching how that team, how Western New York is behind this team. Yep. They want nothing more for them to come and pull it out, of course. I loved watching that because it just feels like, they're rising to the occasion. And they're behind Josh. I still run into people every once in a while down here in Atlanta who are Bills fans, and they're wondering when it comes down to that really crunch time, will he be there for this team? But he'll always put his effort there. I saw him blocking. I saw him running. I mean, he'll do whatever he needs to do to win. That's a positive about a quarterback in this league.
Yeah, I think especially with Burrow being injured and Josh Allen not being injured, I think you have to almost put him as the second best quarterback in the league behind Mahomes. And, there have been times when I think where he's played to that level. And that's really all you can ask for a quarterback is to give you that high-end play. Speaking of high-end play at the quarterback position, we got that yesterday I was going to say the Hoosier Dome, Thomas, because that's how I remember the Colts back in the day, but it was really Lucas Oil Stadium. The Colts got behind 23-0 to the Rams, and Matthew Stafford looked great. Look at these numbers: 77th percentile EPA per play, EPA per dropback in the 83rd. That guy can sling it, and that Puka Nacua wide receivers, breaking all of Anquan Bolden's records for young receivers. He's phenomenal, and exactly what the doctor ordered, especially now with Cooper Kupp possibly coming back from IR. I guess Rams team is salty. I'm super impressed with the play that Sean McVay is doing. But I want to focus here on Anthony Richardson. Anthony Richardson, now you look at these statistics, EPA per play, a little bit above average, success rate below average. It does strike me as, and a lot of that's in the run game. But when I look at Anthony Richardson and I watch him play, it's not pretty all the time. But you can see why the Colts took him at 4th overall. I think there's a lot of talent there, and I think he's making a lot out of a situation without Jonathan Taylor, who's coming back to practice this week. Without the best pass catchers in the world. I'm encouraged by Anthony Richardson so far.
Yeah, kudos to Chris Ballard for going in there, knowing that this is a big year. Get the right quarterback in. The best quarterback they could possibly get in besides the top 2 that were going other places, right? Bring an athlete in here that they can develop, and he's got a lot of skills. That said, and my experience is going back to Matt Ryan way back, so everyone forgive me from diving all the way back to 2008. But the reality is in year 1, you have to make sure you put the quarterback in the right place to be as successful as you can be for that team. Strive and thrive on their really strong points. We know with Anthony Richardson, it's his ability to tuck it. That's a little different than standing up there back tall in the pocket and zinging it 70 yards.
Yeah,
he can do that, of course. But I think it's really, really important you don't put that quarterback in jeopardy to, all of a sudden you're running again and you're getting a little bit reckless, and then you pop another concussion before you know it. You're riding two head bangs, and you have to be careful about that for the rest of the season. So all I'm saying, as an organization, it's really tough. You really strive to really make sure that they're stressing what is right about him, and let him take those balls. I loved how he was rolling out, making his quick release plays.
Yep.
And I love the fact that he just wasn't taking it and going. But I just want to stress the importance of that. I'm sure Chris has talked a lot to his head coach about it, right? They're discussing it all the time. They need to win games. What's their record right now?
2-2. Everybody in the AFC South, Thomas, is 2-2.
Right. Anyway,
so
I like what he's doing. My last comment here, I really do. I just want to see him evolve and stay safe through the season. Not safe at the risk of losing games. Believe me, there's a difference with that.
Yeah, you make such good points. I think the fact that Steichen has done this with Hurts, he's done this with Herbert, like there was a pedigree there that, and again, good on Chris Ballard, right? It could not have been an easy 12 months for Chris Ballard. And even though they're not out of the woods, you would have really have liked to have won that game early in the season with Jacksonville and so forth. You would have liked to win yesterday's game to go to 3-1 for sure. Signs are pointing right for Indianapolis, and I'm happy because I think that there are good people in that building, and it was a tumultuous last 12 months, and things have turned around quite nicely for them. We're going to end with Thomas the tumultuous bowl, if you will, which actually was a very entertaining game between the Denver Broncos, coached by Sean Payton, and the Chicago Bears, coached by Matt Eberflus. There's a lot of green here, Thomas, on both sides of the ball. Yep. Both teams average, positive expected points. Both teams were in the top two-thirds of the league, yes, in success rate. Both teams above the 80th percentile in yards per play. When I look at this game, I thought it was like, this is kind of how you want games to go between teams that are struggling. Unfortunately for Chicago, it didn't work. Matt Eberflus went for a 4th and 1 when they could have kicked the go-ahead field goal. The numbers said kick the field goal. He went for it anyway. I can kind of understand his decision, but it ultimately didn't work out. The Broncos get a field goal. They come back from 28-7. They win the game. Does it save the Broncos season? I'm not sure. Does it make things harder in Chicago? I think by definition it has to. What was your takeaway when you watched this game?
I don't know if it saves the Broncos season. I think up into that final moment, that was a tough thing for Denver to be in there to a team that was struggling with everything that Chicago's struggling with, right? I mean, there's Ryan Poles, second-year general manager with Matt Eberflus. That's you want to talk about that, and I'll tuck that away for a second. That relationship and what's going on in that building and trying to navigate through that is obviously very complicated, right? The game itself and watching your quarterback throw for 335 yards and do some of the things that he did is a positive. They're dealing with, I'm just some of the player stuff they're dealing with. And Coach Eberflus is dealing with right now. Everything that's going on in that building is a lot of us haven't gone through that as general managers, right? When I think about me coming into Atlanta back in 2008, I was on the other side of the Michael Vick debacle, right? So I dealt with having to clean it up. And I remember saying to people, bear with me. I remember saying to people, hey, how are you dealing with this? I said, Mike Smith and I aren't dealing with that. That was something from a past regime. It's not part of ours. So we could move on. So decisions we made weren't a judgment of how we were dealing with the situation. What Ryan and what Matt are dealing with right now is big, and it's legit, and it's dusty at a lot of levels, and it puts a damper on the game. It puts a damper on big-time plays, but then they follow up, unfortunately, with a loss, and you can imagine not only the fan base, but you can imagine the McCaskies don't like wasting money. The McCaskies make strong decisions, and now there's all this banter out there with – is this the hottest seat right now in the country already after 4 games?
It feels like it, but I want to think, right, that it's not. I want to think that you're going to get more than 2 years. We said this, by the way, when we were previewing, Chicago versus Green Bay. We said, I think the market's a little too high on the Bears. I think that, my biggest worry is that there's too many expectations, and if they don't meet them, people are going to lose their jobs prematurely because this is all part of a plan. I don't think I know you like Ryan Pace and, he works for the Falcons now. Ryan Pace made the playoffs a few times with Chicago. He wasn't a complete disaster. So, but at the same time, the roster wasn't Poles decided to tear everything down and build it back up. That takes more than 2 years most of the time. And so I get worried a little bit about, all that, I get worried about it because if they don't have success, that next person that comes in is going to have a pretty solid case. They right now own, Thomas, the first and second pick in the draft. Yeah. So, you love if you were Poles to if things went poorly the rest of the year to have those assets. And I would feel bad for Poles if somebody else got to use them.
Oh, I'm in no way insinuating that Ryan's not going to be there next year. I'm more talking about the seat being hot on the coaching side. And that might not just be you as the GM. When you start your relationship with your head coach, we haven't been in that building, so we don't truly know, right? The GM is going to get a second chance normally. I don't know if that's just what popped up there, if that was what the comment was. Gets a chance to build and hire another head coach. I hate talking about this for Matt Eberflus because I'm like, oh, come on. We're getting a little ridiculous here. And yet when things go the way they go and they keep piling on, it's hard for an ownership group to stay with it, right? Because everyone is throwing up their hands. What I'm saying right now, put yourself in Ryan Poles, where he is, where his head is. He's trying to be the right partner for Matt. That's not easy, right? You walk through the building, people are rolling their eyes. There's an inevitably water cooler conversation. You have a receiver, that's a mess. Whatever's going on with a receiver that no one can even find. In Claypool, what's going on there? What's going on with the coach that's gone? I don't even know. I haven't even seen that. There is a ton. And then you have an owner. We don't know how this is operating. You have an owner pulling you aside, putting their arm around your shoulders and saying, what do you think? Maybe or maybe not. That has happened. And you want to be the loyal guy, and you're not sure if your owner is asking you that to see how you're going to respond. You would pray to God that he's asking your honest opinion. But as a GM, you start guessing like you do with trades. Oh my God, is that owner asking me because he wants my opinion, or is he wanting to see how I'm operating when shit gets dusty? Excuse my language.
No, but well, and Sean had a good question here. As a GM, how do you handle the game management mistake by Eberflus, or the going for it doesn't work? How do you support him there? But then there's the other point. I mean, that you've made is really good, where it's like those two came in together, but they might not come out. And to the point that I think it was Ryan. Always has good points. He said GMs get more chances. It's a weird thing. Head coaches get other head coaching jobs more readily than GMs get other. Like, you rarely see a GM get a second job, but within that job, the GM generally has a longer leash than the head coach does. So it's just a weird dynamic. And to your point, like, if you're a GM and you know that you're going to get maybe one extra stint than the head coach, do you use that to buy yourself time? It's a tough situation, and you don't want to talk about that. You just want to, the honest to God truth, Thomas, is you want to win games. And when you have a 28-7 lead, you try to close that game out so that you can stop talking about that for yet another week. Unfortunately, they lost the game and they have to talk about it some more.
If I may too, we've all seen this, and those of you who have been following football for a long time, you've seen it with GMs out there that ostensibly have turned their backs on head coaches, right? A good friend of mine who's down at New Orleans right now, Jeff Ireland, who I think should be a GM in this league again. He's a very good evaluator. If you recall, he had a couple brushes down there at Miami. One was with a player that he mentioned about the player's mother. That's buried, of course. That was years ago. But Jeff Ireland also had the run-in with Tony Sperano, God bless his soul, who passed away, over the last, 2 years or whatever. Yep. And what happened very quickly is when you're a GM, and it's perceived, this is a really odd situation. When it's perceived by the coaching staffs and the coaching, what am I trying to say? The coaching mob, the coaching clan, and you are known for being a guy that will turn his back quickly on your head coach. There aren't head coaches that want to work with that GM. So when all of a sudden your organization says, we got to go after this guy, and that coveted soul who the McCaskies one day might want or someone else might want, and he comes in, this new coach, and says, I like it, but I don't like the GM. I don't trust the GM. I'll come here only if the GM's not here. Wow. Too bad.
Well, and you have, it makes it really hard. And I think, like, I hope the people obviously that listen to our show religiously, know, I mean, one of the things I've taken from you is how important the interpersonal is in business, and generally speaking, but also like football, it's a rough and tumble game, and you have to have a little bit of a prick to you, right? That's why I was never that good of a football player, let's be honest. And yet at the same time, you have to know that wins and losses count, but you also have to avoid the situation. Like, look, I'm guessing when Mike Smith had to leave, when Mike Smith was let go, I'm assuming Mike Smith looks back and like, look, Thomas gave me, I would have liked to have turned out better, but Thomas gave me, Thomas and the blanks gave me a ton of, I'm guessing that relationship is still fine, even though you had to let a guy go. There are ways of doing these things. And I have a hard time thinking about how, I just have, it's tough to me to think about a guy as a coach being on the, losing his job a year and a half in. And that, I do think Eberflus deserves another year. I'm just going to come out and say it because I think there's just too much, right? To your point about Claypool, that's not Matt Eberflus's fault. They traded the 32nd pick for Chase Claypool, and he's turned out to be a dud. That happens, and it doesn't make Ryan Poles a bad general manager. There are good moves and bad moves. I thought the trade up or the trade back from one was pretty solid. And just like coaching decisions, you have great coaching decisions. You have coaching decisions you'd like to have back. It's part of football, right? And so I think for a partnership like that, it's just really tough. And that's why being a good person and being honest is essentially hugely important in this.
You're so right. I do believe there's no question in my mind that I think all things being equal enough, and I say there's no question that he deserves more time in the role. Matt Eberflus I'm talking about. The only part, take it out of Matt, in any situation, when the organization is turning and churning and it's a mercurial mess, so to speak, if it is in fact that, let's just say a hypothetical, that's when tough decisions are made, right? That's when an owner looks at it and says, yes, in all likelihood, this coach should have 1 or 2 more years to show his stuff, but we can't because our players he's no longer controlling the locker room, right? When an owner and a GM feel like this head coach is losing the team, and it's a legit look yourself in the mirror losing the team, not just it's an easy way out, then you have legitimate problems.
Yeah, for sure. So that was an entertaining game. I'm happy for Denver that they won one. Obviously, I think Peyton's a great coach, and the George Payton, the GM, has done some good things as well. So it's good for them to get out the schneid. Hopefully Chicago will. Now we get Thursday. It's a funny story, but like Thursday, Washington, Chicago is a Thursday night game again. And I got to tell you, when Tage and Parker create their watchability score, I don't know if that's going to have a high mark in terms of watchability, Washington, Chicago, but I'll be interested to see who gets the win there. Washington was very competitive in Philadelphia this week. I think another cool mark for Rivera and Mayhew and guys like that who are, trying to build a roster while also dealing with new ownership. Like Washington has actually been pretty competitive, the Buffalo game aside, but Buffalo is a house, as we saw on Sunday. So I'm interested to see Chicago, Washington on Thursday, just for the very fact that there's a couple franchises who are kind of in this kind of weird spot, and I want to see how they compete against each other. We'll talk about that for a little bit on Wednesday. Thomas, anything else? I mean, this has been a long we haven't even, I don't think either one of us has taken a breath, and we're 56 minutes in. Any parting words?
No, parting words are kick butt on your watching and reporting on the Thursday game. We are look, I just love that we're now getting into the momentum of the season, right? Before the season started, we were where we were. Of course, we're trying to get it out there. Now we can tell our passion on this. It's going to be interesting. I hope I can continue to provide, like you provide your expertise, my opinions on what's going on, at least what I imagine might be going on within buildings from a GM perspective. Keep asking me the tough questions. I will for you as well. I won't ask you to talk about your dissertation, but I will ask you.
I actually don't know. I think my dissertation's up here somewhere. One of these days I'll actually put it up. Before I forget, if you're at all interested in this stuff, Football Analytics with Python and R is out. You can buy one on Amazon. But yeah, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you for all the support, everybody in here. We've had record numbers on both Twitter and YouTube today, which is perfect because I think we provided insight that no one else can. Please hit the like button. Please hit the subscribe button. We had a couple cool reviews on Apple Podcasts as well as YouTube. Please provide those. Those are great. That helps me show Thomas and my other boss, PTJ, that we're doing a great job here, that we're providing insights. So, tell somebody you like about this show so that they'll come and listen to it. And you can tell them I was there first. So for Thomas Dimitroff, for Eric Eager, this is episode 108 of the Sumer Sports.